Hey, how are you doing? I'm Scott Crawford. I am a U.S. history teacher here at Lamar High School, and you may be in my class already, and I'm not sure when you're going to be watching this. You may be watching this at the start of a new school year or at the end of an old one. So anyway, I'm making this during the coronavirus time. So I had some extra time on my hands. But anyway, you will have, if you're not in my class, that's fine, but you should have in Canvas, there should be a Google Sheet that goes along with this, and you can answer the questions as it goes along. Feel free to pause this and backtrack as you need, and so forth, and get the answers to it that way and everything. You need to watch the whole thing and have the sound turned up and everything. Some of the stuff I'm going to say answers to some of the questions, and this will go in order, so it'll be pretty easy. Our subject today is World War One. And this is a patriotic image that is not from World War One. Instead, this is a picture of the Vietnam Memorial in Washington, D.C., but that's okay. It's a good patriotic image and everything. So we're going to be getting some of the basic concepts of World War One. One thing I need for you to understand is that the war has a list of reasons for the war to start itself. It starts over in Europe, which is many of the countries in Europe, and the United States is not involved at first. In fact, we try to stay out of it. That'll also happen during World War II, where that war will start, and we'll try to stay out of it as well. So you will actually need to be familiar with two sets of causes. One of them is a cause for the war to start, which is the acronym you see on your screen there, the word MAIN, and we'll get into those parts. The good news is you've probably seen that before in your world history class, and it may be already somewhat familiar with it to you. The other list is going to be a list of reasons that we get involved, but that's going to come along a little bit later. So anyway, the primary causes are militarism, alliances, imperialism, and nationalism. You won't really need to know this for this class, but the immediate cause of the war is the assassination of that Archduke that it refers to there. That's what got everybody fighting in the first place. But these reasons that are in black there on your screen are the reasons that are background that led to the actual fighting there. Militarism is just the buildup of huge standing armies and navies, and several of the countries in Europe started building up their military at the time. One thing you'll need to know about is going to be the German U-boats, which are submarines. U-boat means undersea boat, which means undersea boat, and that's what it is, just a submarine. And we're going to talk more about unrestricted submarine warfare in a few minutes. Here's what's called a dreadnought class warship. These were new at the time. Airplanes were invented at this point. This is going to be the early 1900s. The war starts in 1914, but they're not a major part of this war. It's really all about the ships and trench warfare that we'll talk about just in a little bit here. Here's some U-boats. They're frankly one of the reasons that the boats weren't even bigger is because these submarines would sink them, especially from the Germans. The next topic in the acronym MAIN are alliances, and there was two alliances. Don't worry, you don't have to have them memorized, but you do need to know the basic countries that are involved. The Triple Alliance, which I call the bad guys, that's Germany, Austria, Hungary, and Ottoman Empire. And then the Triple Entente, which is the one on the bottom here. Let me get my pointer out. There it is. And there it is. And right there, and that's France, Russia, and Great Britain. You'll notice the U.S. is not involved at this point. Later, we will join these guys to fight in the war there and everything. But that's going to come up towards the end. We're only in the war for just over a year, and it's at the very end. So I like to say we finished it. So anyway, imperialism is when countries have control of other countries, and you can see Africa here. And you don't have to have this memorized for this class, but I do want you to notice that all the different countries in Europe that own pieces of Africa. Nearly every part of Africa is owned by some European country, and that gets them to fighting. They start arguing over and fighting over who owns what, and you can see just by looking at that's going to be a problem. And then nationalism. This sounds good. It sounds like when people have pride, but this is almost like too much pride in one's country or ethnic group in this case. So you can see the cartoon shows them leading the other soldiers, I guess, off a cliff in the name of nationalism there. So anyway, it can be dangerous. That, like I said, that Archduke's assassination was the spark that starts this war in 1914. They were ready to fight anyway, though. And now the alliance system kicks in. And it really did start, two countries that said they'd help each other, and then they all just start jumping in and everything. So here's some things here. Feel free to pause that if you need to, but you don't need to probably know all that for this class. It's fine. One of the things that we need to understand about this war is the trench system of warfare. The way a trench works is the soldiers stand in this front line trench and they get supplies from the back. This whole thing faces to your left of your screen, and there's another system facing the other way. And what a trench is this word right here. It is a stalemate. It means that the war is basically a tie, so the people just dig into the ground to keep from getting shot. Airplanes really are only used to just for warning and spying and stuff like that. So anyway, the part in the middle between the two trench system is called no man's land, because if you went in there, you were going to be dead there and everything. So this is a large part of the war. If you were not on a ship, you were going to be probably in one of these trenches. And prior to the U.S. joining, the war's been going on for 3 years. There's injuries that they never thought they would see. This is the war that we'll talk about in a few minutes. Machine guns are introduced really for the first time in a war and led to just thousands and thousands of people being killed. In the war, Russia, who was on the good guys' side at first, they kind of quit in 1917 and they turned to a communist form of government. You might file that away because that's something we're going to be talking a lot about later on this year in our class. And communism is a form of government that governments turn to when they're desperate for food, and that's the way they work. Anyway, we want to be neutral at the start of the war. We saw how bad it was. We think it's Europe's problem, and we're a long way away from them. We have other issues we're trying to deal with, and we're also making money selling goods to our buddies, the British and French. So we're doing okay not being in the war, but we're going to get roped into it. Okay. This SLUTS is the acronym that refers to the reasons we get into the war. And there's 5 of them. Don't worry, really you only need to know 2 for purposes of this class. I guess 3 actually. But anyway, and they kind of go out of order, so it's a little confusing. We designed this so it's easy to remember. But anyway, the first one, it has to do, the first 2, the S and L, the Sussex and Lusitania, they have to do with German U-boats. And the Germans sunk a French ship in 1916. There were some American citizens on that, so we kind of made them promise that they wouldn't sink any more boats where there might be Americans on there. And they said it was okay, but it wound up not happening. So anyway, in another one that happened near the same time as this Lusitania, and this one had 128 Americans on there. After this, there starts to be some calls in America for us to go to war because 128 of our citizens were on this. It's a British boat, but some of our citizens are on it, so it makes a lot of people upset. And after this, the Germans basically announced that they're just going to attack any boat that they see and that we better keep our people off of them. That's the unrestricted submarine warfare, and that's the most important reason for us to get involved in the war, although there is one other one that's important. It's the fact that the Germans just keep saying we're just going to sink them. So up until 1917, there's 6 more ships that are sunk that either are U.S. boats or have U.S. citizens on them. And that makes a lot of people upset. So anyway, let's see. There's some German U-boats in London, which is the side we're going to join. Here's some anti-German propaganda. We'll be looking at some of this in class there and everything. They make the Germans out like they're the gorilla or the mad brute or whatever there and everything. So one event that happened, the Zimmerman note, this is the Z in SLUTS, but in 1917, the Germans wrote to Mexico, or they sent a telegram, actually. It says they wrote, but they sent a telegram, and unfortunately for them, that telegraph goes through London, so this thing's intercepted by the British. And basically, they promised Mexico that if Mexico would help them and go to war against the United States, that they would give Mexico the territory that we had taken from them in the 1800s. That includes Texas, Arizona, New Mexico. So anyway, Texas was part of this attempted deal there and everything. So anyway, the British tell us about it, and it makes a lot of people upset. So it really leads us to going to war with the Germans there. You don't need to read all that. It just kind of gives the details of that. And this is the land. Mexico is down here. Up here is Texas. They basically promised they would give this back to Mexico because they used to own it before 1848, I think was the year that it was taken over. That's not for this class. So anyway, out of those reasons for us joining the war, the most important one is going to be this one right here, the unrestricted submarine warfare that led us to get involved. And we don't get involved until 1917. Uh, this is Woodrow Wilson. He's the president. This shows him asking for a declaration of war. In 1916, he had campaigned for the presidency, basically touting the fact that he had kept us out of war, and now here he is getting us into a war. But this time, most people wanted to get in. So here's some characteristics of the war. Probably the biggest technology of the war is the machine gun, and then that's why they're digging the trenches to keep from getting shot by the machine guns. That leads to that stalemate. Just be ready. There's going to be questions on tests about that concept right there. So there's some more scenes. We'll be talking more about trenches in class. Wasn't a fun time. To break that tie, they start building tanks, which is just basically a giant vehicle that can either go over trees or go over trenches or whatever. It didn't matter if you got shot because they were bulletproof and everything. So, poison gas was used during the war. It's a dangerous thing for both sides to use because you can set off poison gas and if the wind turns, it can actually kill your own people and everything. So it's outlawed after the war. Planes were not huge in this one. It's going to be World War II, where they're mainly used just for observation and spying and that sort of thing. So here's submarines. Germans were most effective users of U-boats and submarines there. So there's the Battle of Argonne Forest. This is the largest battle the U.S. participates in. And this is Alvin York. That's somebody we're going to talk about in this class. He was actually a pacifist. Didn't believe in war, but once he changed his mind, he went to town. In an incident, he captured 132 people and killed 25 of the enemy there, and he gets the Congressional Medal of Honor. We'll talk about some other individuals in class there and everything. Toward the end of the war, Woodrow Wilson, our president, just figured out that we were probably going to win the war. So what can we do to make it to where there's not another war? He didn't know there would be. And by the way, this war is actually at this time called the Great War instead of World War I. They didn't know at this time there would be a World War II, of course. So Wilson made a plan called the 14 Points. And after the war ends, after the Germans surrender and the war ends, Wilson presents his 14 points to the countries in Europe. And it basically says what Wilson would like to see. And you've got some things here: self-determination, let countries decide what kind of government they can have for themselves, freedom of the seas, end of the treaties and everything. But the big thing that it has is the League of Nations. He wants to form an organization to help solve disputes. And unfortunately for him, people in the United States, which he was the United States president, but people in the U.S. didn't like it. They said that this was the kind of thing that got us into the war in the first place and started the war in the first place. And so the idea of having an organization that sounds like an alliance, which was one of the causes of the war. So it actually, it's kind of ironic. It's our idea to start the League of Nations, but we don't join the League of Nations. So the 14 points were mostly ignored. The big four refer to the countries that won in Europe: Britain, France, and Italy, there and everything. So anyway, Germany and Russia are not even allowed to attend this thing. It's not, Russia is not as important, but there's the big four. And there and everything. Germany was not allowed to attend because nobody cared what they thought. They were just going to tell them what's going to happen to them. And one thing they're going to say, and this is important right here, okay? The way they dealt with this thing directly leads to World War II there and everything. So this, you have, let me backtrack. This is Wilson's plan, which is called the 14 Points. That's not the plan that they chose. The big four chose the Treaty of Versailles, which is near Paris. That's like a Treaty of Paris in other U.S. history or whatever. But this is a treaty that's going to seek revenge against Germany. And they say they want to have peace in the future, but they basically make Germany take responsibility for the war, and they make them pay all this money there and everything. And they have to give up their colonies, keeping in mind that that's how they probably would have paid for that. Now, right after soon after World War I is the Great Depression that hits, and it's especially bad in Germany. Germany's also forced to reduce the size of their military, and a bunch of land is taken away from them too. So Germany is punished so harshly that it really leads to it just over 20 years later, World War II to start there and everything. It's got some new countries that are involved here. Austria-Hungary's broken up. The Ottoman Empire's broken up. So anyway, and you don't need to know all those. Just be aware they made some new boundaries. There's a map with the new countries, and that'll be more like what it's going to look like at the start of World War II. We'll get rid of that. Here's Africa, and you can see that they changed some stuff there too. Yeah, here's some consequences. Germany has to take responsibility. Well, they start blaming France and Great Britain. The reparations or the payments that they were required to pay to Germany and France destroy their economy so much they can't recover, and it really sets the stage for a Hitler to come up in the 1920s and 30s there. So anyway, people in the U.S. rejected the treaty basically on the basis of the League of Nations. This is a powerful Senator Henry Cabot Lodge who opposed the League of Nations, saying it was going to lead us into more war. And there was always that idea that we were going to stay out of wars because we're on the other side of the globe from all this stuff in Europe and everything. So yeah, you don't need that. Let's see. Some things about the home front. After the war, we actually loan a lot of money to the European countries. Jobs are kind of scarce at the time in the 1920s, have a hard time. And also civil rights were not important in our country, or the lack of civil rights was important, but that was not something African-American soldiers, that first of all, they were forced to fight in separate units anyway in the war. And then after they got home, they were facing discrimination when they got home. 1920, that's the after World War I, Warren Harding campaigns on the promise that he's going to return us to normalcy, meaning return things to the way they were back before the war there and everything. And he wins that election pretty handily there and everything. So that's the story of World War II. Our next lesson, we'll be talking about the 1920s, then the Great Depression, then World War II. So anyway, if you have any questions, come see me and or talk to your own U.S. history teacher, and I will appreciate your time. And we will talk to you soon. Thank you.